Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson, broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. In the office today, it's Sunday, had some reading to do. My BI guys gave me a nice thing on blockchain-based voting, the latest and greatest. And of course, digging into a litany of other pieces of paperwork to accommodate and handle. You know, last two videos I made were a little hard on the right, and so I figure I should be bipartisan a bit and piss everybody off in the world. You know, I'm not doing my job unless I make everybody angry. So I decided to make a video on the burdens of proof, because some things seem to still be lost in what's going on right now, and I think it's really important that people get it. There's this concept of consent of the governed. So basically, we like to believe we live in societies where we have some sort of say in what happens. And the reality is that we mostly don't. You know, if you transplanted an American and put them into a dictatorship that had a slightly beneficent dictator, they probably wouldn't notice much difference in their day-to-day lifestyle. Now, you have all these people that show up and say, oh, how could you say that? We elect our leaders and all these other things and rah, rah, rah. We don't elect our leaders. I've always taken a position about that. These primaries that we have in the Republican and Democrat parties, first, are monopolistic. There is no third-party representation in America. The Libertarian Party was the best running of the third parties, got 1% of the vote. 1%. Getting ballot access, if you ever run for a third party, is damn near impossible in all 50 states, unless you're a billionaire or you have a very strong political coalition. Then every institution we have works against you. Media works against you, delegitimizes you from the outset, and doesn't provide you a platform. Social media works against you, and the administrative arm of the United States works against you. So we have no third-party representation and access. And let's be clear about the leaders in the primaries. Their legitimacy, funding, and ability to be competitive is usually decided before the primaries occur. Now, something the left in the United States has missed, and they don't understand why people love Trump so much, is that whether you believe he's Hitler and he's a racist, sexist, homophobe, all of that aside, the reality is he's the first American since probably Eisenhower who actually just came in and decided to take over a political party without any grace, will, or permission. Reagan, to a certain extent, also did this. A complete outsider, no political experience, wasn't part of the system, just came in and co-opted it. Had Trump not run, it would have been a choice between Jeb Bush, the Bush family's been in politics since the 1930s, and Hillary Clinton. Where is that a diverse choice? It's the same old, same old. So somebody new came in and created a kinship saying, you actually can influence things for the first time ever. You actually, if you get on this train, we can do things a little differently. Now, the correct response to that is we, the American people, need to start pushing for systems that give us more control and choice in our government. And what happened instead was we have to destroy this contagion, this pathogen in the system. This cannot be accepted. And the system closed ranks in every dimension of the U.S. government, every dimension of the media, of Silicon Valley, and institutions, academic and otherwise, in the United States, closed wagons around a 78-year-old swamp monster who's been in politics for 47 years and chose to ignore everything about this person's character and history in an attempt to remove a pathogen. And now, today and yesterday, I see big parades in the streets, and they say, mission accomplished. And they all pat each other on the back. And the 70 million people who didn't want this, they just have to accept it. Huzzah. And everything will go back to normal. Let's be clear here. Nothing is going to go back to normal in American society. The genie's out of the bottle. Americans have had a taste of the ability to change the narrative and the ability to go beyond what they're told they must accept. We ask, well, why do so many people believe that this election is corrupt? Because the very institutions you're supposed to trust to act as checks and balances to audit the election were against one of the candidates. You expect the media to be an arm of investigative journalism, and if there were discrepancies or frauds, to launch investigations. Does anybody, left or right, in the United States reasonably believe that the media, if they uncover something, that something was rigged against Trump, would actually write a story about it? They decided to call everything a conspiracy theory before a single vote was counted. But we're all too willing to adopt the Russia conspiracy theory. So that institution has no credibility, nor does the administrative arm, the bureaucracy of the U.S. government, because they wanted the guy gone too. So why should so many Americans have faith and credibility and trust in the electoral system? If you want power, you have to, and especially if you're asking for consent for that power instead of using force, you have to build a system where people believe in the system. And it's very clear at the end of all of this, no one believes in the system anymore. The left is soon going to turn on itself. They have this guy come in, and the party was promised racial justice and critical race theory and massive infrastructural spending and taxing the wealthy and powerful. And they were promised free health care and free education and a unicorn in every garage. And here's what's going to happen. Nothing is going to happen like that. It's going to stall up. All those billionaires who don't pay taxes, they're not going to pay taxes still. Somehow Amazon's not going to still pay taxes. Jeff Bezos is just going to keep getting wealthier. They're going to still have their fingers on the reins of power. You know what that's going to do? The AOCs of the left, they're going to go crazy and they're going to start eating the party. Primary challenges and all kinds of chicanery over the next 4 years. Meanwhile, the right is going to say, well, power's power. Let's go get it back and take opportunity where they can find it and start gaining electoral gains 2022, potentially even 2024. Again, these are the professional governing classes of the United States. They have nothing to do with rank and file mainstream of the United States. Meanwhile, the inflation, Meanwhile, the inflation continues to grow. Meanwhile, it's harder and harder for everyday people to survive. The distance between the haves and the have-nots tends to increase. The warfare continues to happen. Globalization continues to happen, unfettered. And we're not always the winners in that. China continues to surge. Things that people actually care about are not getting solved. And that's where we're at. So we talk about the burdens of proof this election. What institutions are supposed to exist to give you faith that the people who were elected are actually elected legitimately? And the reality is that there are no institutions left for that. No one trusts anybody anymore. Had Trump won, we would see 70 million Democrats taking to the streets, setting fires, and saying the system is rigged and broken and racist and institutional change needs to happen. Why the hell do you think all the windows were boarded up? Fear of roving right-wing militias? Come on now. So this is a pivotal moment for our industry, and it's a pivotal moment for the world as we focus on what's called a Great Reset. Elites are floating around, and they absolutely do want to solidify a world order where very few have control over very many. I've always believed that because that's what they say and that's what they do. And every time they're given an opportunity to do it, they do it. And they say, you don't need transparency, trust us, and you can trust these 6 institutions over here to watch us. And all those institutions are incestuous and nepotistic and interconnected and controlled by the very people they're supposed to audit and oversee. And we're fed up with it. The world is fed up with it. We're done with it. We're not stupid. And the problem with the internet is it made information flow instantaneously without control to everyone. And we are facing an existential crisis where we as the human race don't know how to govern, given that the people that we're governing are not consenting to it anymore and accepting the crap. The point of this industry is to have a conversation about governance. That's the root of cryptocurrencies. Always has been, always will be. The first application of it was the governance of money. Our industry got together and said, wow, the central banks have no incentive to change. Wall Street has no incentive to change. Governments have no incentive to change. They're just going to keep doing this, and the losers are going to be everyday people at the expense of the few. And every time they make a mistake, we pay for that mistake. You can make the money, but you never lose the money. It's a moral hazard. And so the cryptocurrency space emerged and said, hey, we're going to do things a little differently. And we were laughed at. All the economists, the Paul Krugmans and all the way down, said there's no way Bitcoin can work. There's no way that deflationary monetary policy is possible. Just none. And I will remind the Paul Krugmans of the world, if I held $1 in a U.S. bank account when Bitcoin was created back in 2008, and I left that dollar in the account, the buying power of that dollar would be about 75% of what it is today. If I had $1 worth of Bitcoin during that time period, that dollar would be worth, depending on when you got it, what the price rate was, $100,000 plus dollars. Welcome to the power of deflationary money. And so that's our industry. That was the bedrock of it. And then we said, wow, we can apply these governance tools to other things. We can apply them to property rights. We can apply them to identity. We can apply them to contracts. We can apply them across the spectrum and board, including voting. And we started having conversations of, why aren't we doing this? What is the reason not to go down this road? What is the reason not to have auditability and transparency and checks and balances and the ability to verify things? One universal truth is every single person who voted in the U.S. election, myself included, has no way of verifying that my vote was really counted and my vote was really counted for the person that I voted for. This is 2020, the age of Google, Facebook, the age of HoloLens, and we cannot have a system where I can verify that my vote was properly counted and that fraudulent votes didn't come through the system. And I'm supposed to trust institutions that were in the bed with another guy, one of the candidates running, to basically make sure that that didn't happen. And we have all this technology that can prevent that, can actually solve the problem. The wars coming ahead are not going to be left and right, rich and poor, socialism versus capitalism. These are 20th century conversations. The wars coming up ahead are going to be about relationships between the governed and those who govern them. And what expectations do we have? We keep electing leaders on a global basis without KPIs. We keep electing leaders on a global basis without them committing to specific targets of where the world needs to go. They use buzzwords, hope and change and improve and make better, but they never actually tell you specifics of this is how much we're going to spend, this is what we're going to do, and this is the definition of success. Here's how we're going to measure it, and here's how you verify that it's getting done, and here's how we bail out if it turns out the strategy's not working. I have to do that every day in the corporate world, in the business world. We have KPIs. We have OKRs. We have to project out budgets year by year. And I don't have the luxury of deficit spending. I don't have the luxury of running red budgets every single year and then blaming a prior CEO or a political faction of my company when it doesn't work. We do that either we stay in business or we go out of business, and we're entrusted to produce a mission. Why is it so hard to demand the same level of accountability with this government? Why is it so hard to get a report card that can tell us where our money is being spent and why it was spent that way and who got it? Why is it so hard for us to be able to get verification that our votes were counted? Because no one wants to go down that road. The people who rule don't have the skills to deliver when they're held accountable. It's just that simple. It's not a cause for celebration, the Biden election. It's cause for deep reflection and for everybody to ask, where the hell are we going to go? A 78-year-old man who's been in government for 47 years, who was part of the Iraq War, part of the drug war, part of the crime bills from the 1990s that imprisoned millions of people, rightly and unrightly, part of every major government decision, sometimes egregious decisions, is not going to magically wake up and say, now I shall be effective and solve all of your problems. Decency has come back. There is no decency in saying half of your country is deplorable. There is no decency in saying half of your country is racist and sexist and homophobic and worships Hitler. There's no decency there. There's no decency in promoting ideology that says people should disown family members. There's no decency in promoting ideology that says you have to only be friends with people who believe the things you believe. That's a recipe for a civil war, if I've ever heard one. And that's where we're at. We have an opportunity to do things differently. And looking to 2021, those who are angry with the results of these things, instead of converging, and this was my point in the last two videos, to conspiratorial thinking, it is a really good idea for each and every one of you to ask, how do we do things differently? And the surest way we can make progress in the United States and abroad is to start local, in your municipality, your city. Those elections are very small. Decisions are made often by small groups of actors, and there's a huge amount of malleability. And even a little bit of grassroots momentum can achieve great things. Getting blockchains into your municipality is the first step into getting it into the state. And once you get it into the state, that's the next step in getting it across the United States. And you know what? If the federal government becomes impossible to rein in, well, we can replace them. It's called a constitutional convention. And if 2/3 of the United States wake up, let's go do that. And let's go write things properly. We have to take control of the ballot. We have to take control of the voting systems. And we have to take control of the way decisions are made and how consent is given. And we have to demand transparency and accountability and vision at every level of government. And we cannot succumb to the temptations of division. We cannot look at people we politically disagree with as evil. We cannot look at people who, for some reason, don't want to give your particular favorite person power as Nazis, regardless of where they fall. These are tools used by elites to divide people for political power. They serve as no purpose, and it will only end up in the destruction of society. In addition, we look to the social media platforms. Time has come for the great decentralization to occur. We need to move from companies to protocols. Facebook has to come to an end, as does Twitter, as does all of these platforms that assert that it's their job to control what's real and what's not real, what's true and what's false, who's legitimate, who's illegitimate. This is perhaps one of the most arrogant, blindsided, and dictatorial things I have seen during my lifetime in a free society. It is not the job of unelected corporatists sitting in Silicon Valley to decide what is real and what is not real. Because if they had that power, Bitcoin would not exist. Fact checkers would show up the minute Bitcoin came out, citing Paul Krugman saying it's a scam and it must end. Our entire industry would be at peril if we allowed that to occur back then. And now it is rapidly becoming the standard, reinforced by this toxic narratives flooding and flooding and flooding. We need to liberate knowledge, we need to liberate communication, and we need to liberate discourse. Now, for my part, I build these tools, and we always build them patent-free and open source. And we always build them in a way that they're neutral, and anyone, regardless of where they come from or what they believe, can use it. And I will never allow my platforms to embrace deplatforming, groupthink, and censorship. It's wrong. It's always wrong. And I don't care about these counter arguments because when you dissect them, what they're really saying is the stuff I disagree with is hate speech. The stuff I disagree with is dangerous. The stuff I agree with must be amplified. Who among us should be so powerful to have the capacity to control these things for billions of people around the world? And you end up with insane outcomes, like the Ayatollah of Iran's tweets saying death to Israel and the Holocaust didn't happen, being legitimate and not deplatformed, and the press secretary of the White House in the United States quoting a newspaper being deplatformed. And when questioned about this, they don't care because there's no checks and balances and there's no one there to keep them accountable. So in addition to the municipal revolution, where we have to get blockchain and transparency and we have to get accountability at every single levels of our government, we also need a protocol revolution to replace these social media hegemonies and deconsolidate them and ensure that there is the free movement of ideas and speech so people don't get deplatformed. And then finally, we have to ask ourselves globally, where does the human race want to go by 2100? What's the point? How should we live? Is GDP honestly the measure that we should use to say that we've made progress? Or perhaps human development indexes? Maybe something else. But there needs to be a conversation of how should people live in the 21st century? What is a human right versus a human aspiration? And who should be responsible for providing that? Who's being left behind in society? And what are we going to do about it? And what should be left to a governance system and what should be left to our character and moral goodwill? That conversation has to happen. And it hasn't. It's occurred with bureaucrats and idealists and academics and United Nations groups, and they're all floating around with great language. And then they put nations like Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Committee to enforce that glowing vision. It's a joke. We need to have a better global conversation about these things. And then we need to look to 2100 and ask ourselves, how do we as a species get there? What do we need to invest in? What do we need to build? What wonders of technology do we need to bring to bear? How do we make sure it's sustainable so that once it's there, it lasts for as long as we care? And how do we make sure that we get along as we get there? That's progress. That's the world I'd like to live in. Not a world where half of my country hates the other half and everybody is in their camps throwing hand grenades at each other, and a world that continues to get more fractured and polarized. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the internet now. We're all one people now. We're all interconnected now. Ideas anywhere in the world can reach anywhere else in the world. We do not need to regress into tribalism. And we are building technology in this industry that actually can find a way to govern and manage people without declaring a world leader or some dictator or some transnational unelected committee. This is going to be the century. The human race decides how it's going to exist for the next 5 to 10 centuries. You have them every now and then. When the Roman Empire formed in the last century of BC, decided how all of Europe was going to exist for hundreds of years. When the Catholic Church overtook Europe, again, that's what happened. The rise of the British Empire, again, the rise of the American Empire, again, the rise of the Russian Empire. Generally, decisions are made in the short term, 10, 20, 30 years, small things that turn into big things. Over the arc of history, we'll decide how humans will live, billions of us, for hundreds of years. And this century is no different, and it's absolutely critical. We have existentially damaging technology coming, like CRISPR, like nanotechnology, like artificial intelligence. And if we do nothing, these things will end the race. Look up the Fermi paradox. We have all kinds of things that are coming with the information economy that make it difficult to discern fact from fiction. And if we do nothing as a species, this will divide us at levels we've never seen before. We will see the birth of new religions in this century to replace the old ones, which have been deemed inconvenient or obsolete for the needs of society, as we move from one that no longer concerns itself with war, famine, and disease, but rather concerns itself with a loss of meaning in a life of unlimited abundance and a pursuit of unlimited happiness. So, this is the century where we're going to have to put up or shut up. And it's my generation's and those who are with me's duty to do our best. And this election in 2020 was one of them that gave us an opportunity to take a step back and really ask that question. And I hope each and every one of you rises to the occasion and asks it too, how do we want to live and where do we want to go? I will always be an optimist, and I will always be an advocate for the best in people, and believe that if you let people live their lives and work hard, that good things can happen, especially if we are willing to work together. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not a realist and that bad things can't happen. In fact, they often do. And it doesn't mean that perfection is achieved and that some libertarian utopia can happen tomorrow. But this is the first century where the tools have existed, where the ideology of libertarianism actually has the ability to do great good. It's not a hypothetical anymore. It can be applied. And we've seen this on the monetary policy side. And again, we will see it in every other facet. And it's our destiny to grab. It really is. And what are the burdens of proof? Well, is your life better after you adopt an optimistic, positive, meaningful, collective viewpoint? Or is it worse? Do you have purpose? Do you have clarity? Do you feel like we can actually achieve things? Or do you live in fear, despair, hopelessness, belief that some new world order is going to just destroy everything anyway, and descend into cynicism and say things can never change? I would like to live in a world where we can change things. And you know what? If there is a new world order and conspiracy and cabal and they prevent all of that, then let them kill me. And frankly, anyone else for that matter, because life is not worth living in slavery. Life is not worth living in chains, in bondage, and in fear. It's better to die believing that you can change everything than live in fear that you cannot. That's how you make things better. You have to have the courage to take that step forward and lead people out of those holes and take them somewhere else. Take them out of the cave. And that's what we're doing. That's the point of this industry. That's why I will never stop being political. That's why I will continue commenting on these things. And I just don't give a shit if you feel that lowers the price of ADA or shuts some people off. This is not a game of making ADA $1. This is a game of changing the very fabric of how the human race works. And it will take decades, if not centuries, to see it through to the end. And there will be many leaders that come after me, after I'm spent and worn out. If that's not what you signed up for, find a different industry. Go invest in something else. Go spend your time somewhere else. Cryptocurrencies are crazy because they are crazy enough to believe they can change the world. They are crazy enough to believe that we can do things differently for the first time in human history. How liberating is that? And yes, there's great risk. And yes, there are many unanswered questions. And yes, there's going to be a lot of failures along the way and missteps along the way and things that don't go right the first time or the second time or the third time. But that's what I signed up for. That's why we do the things we do. That's why we build the things the way we do. That's why we don't pursue intellectual property. It's why we use the scientific method. It's why we're inclusive. It's why we're in 40 countries. It's why we've built a coalition of hundreds of thousands of people across the world. And I will continue growing that coalition. We'll wake up with millions and then tens of millions. And then if we can push it to billions, and you know what? At that point, we did change the world. How else would one spend life? What's the point? Would you really want to be a billionaire in Russia or North Korea or China? Is life so great there where at any moment someone can just decide to take it all away from you because you're politically inconvenient, or they think you're a threat, you need to be gulagged, a life of constant bondage and fear. These are the decisions we as a race have to make in the 21st century. And I've made mine. I've absolutely made mine. And I understand the requirements of it, that I'm on my own in many cases. I'm out on an island. I'm going to be subject to constant criticism, and I'm forced to look at the world with skepticism. And every single thing, I have to use an exhaustive amount of thinking skills to just try to discern fact from fiction. And in many cases, I have to go into wildernesses that are quite dangerous. But that's okay, because it's a life well spent pursuing that. And if you join us in that, it is also a life well spent. And it's a life spent with meaning and purpose. And you know what? Even if we get 10% of what we wanted, at least we slowed down this terrible, terrible direction the world is heading into towards centralization and opaqueness and dictatorial control and transnational globalism without any checks and balances and oversight, and so few having control over so many. So that's the other side of the videos that I made. I think that each and every one of us has to ask ourselves what this is all about, where we're going to go. And we can't celebrate too soon because one particular win has happened or battle has been won in your view and demonize someone else. We are all in this together, no matter what your political persuasion happens to be or your particular beliefs happen to be. We're human beings, and it's about damn time we start treating each other like that and recognize the common decency we all need to have. Thanks for listening.